Megan Dawson had always moved through the world with a quiet softness, the kind that made people speak gently around her without even realizing why. She was small-framed, with soft brown hair that curled slightly at the ends, and she had spent her entire life in Portland, drifting between its gray winters, slow rain, and neighborhoods she knew by heart. Nothing about her life was dramatic or loud. She preferred calmness, familiarity, things she could hold on to. But calmness has a way of dissolving when life begins to shift beneath your feet. She remembered, almost with disbelief now, how Kyle Dawson had once shown up at her doorstep like a textbook gentleman. Back then, he carried himself with the self-assurance of a man who always knew the right words to say. He told her he wanted them to build a long, happy life together, that he dreamed of a home full of children's laughter. He spoke about stability, protection, a future where she would never have to worry again. His promises came wrapped in charm, sweetness, and the kind of confidence Megan had always thought she lacked. And maybe that was why she didn't notice the warning signs. Or didn't want to. Megan hadn't fallen head over heels in love with Kyle. The truth was gentler, quieter. She simply liked the idea of someone steady standing beside her. Someone who appeared strong enough to shield her from the dull ache of loneliness that had followed her for years. Kyle seemed like that person. Unshakable, solid, safe, or at least she convinced herself he was. But her father's failing health turned every choice into a countdown. Richard Dawson had lived long enough to become the center of Megan's world, a place she always returned to when life became overwhelming. When his heart issues worsened, when his breathing grew heavier and his doctor visits more frequent, she felt the walls closing in. Richard didn't ask for much, but he did ask for one thing, that she find someone who could take care of her when he no longer could. He would say it with a tired smile, reaching for her hand. "I just want to know you're not alone, honey. That's all." Those words pressed on Megan harder than she ever admitted. She could see that time was running out. His doctor quietly warned her that his prognosis was not improving and that she should prepare herself. She wasn't ready to lose him, but she was even less ready to lose him without giving him the comfort he longed for. So she rushed. She let fear push her forward. She told herself that marrying Kyle would bring her father peace, that it was the right thing to do even if her heart wasn't fully aligned with the choice. And when Kyle occasionally revealed brief flashes of arrogance or impatience, she pushed them down, convinced herself he was simply stressed or misunderstood, and repeated the same fragile reassurance: he's good enough. He'll keep his promises. Richard Dawson passed away just days before the wedding, leaving Megan suspended in a haze of grief, so heavy she could barely hold herself upright. She moved through the morning of the ceremony as if her body were made of glass, fragile, hollow, ready to shatter under the smallest touch. Portland's sky, gray and wet, matched a weight inside her chest. She had wanted to postpone everything, even begged Kyle to delay the date until she could breathe without feeling her ribs tighten. But Kyle had insisted that plans were already in motion, that guests were invited, that changing anything now would only make things harder. By the time she arrived at the venue, her face was pale, her steps unsteady. She clutched the bouquet, mostly to have something to hold on to. Kyle met her at the entrance, his jaw tight, his eyes sharp with irritation rather than sympathy. He leaned in, the smile on his face strained for the cameras around them. "Don't embarrass me," he hissed quietly, teeth barely parted. "People are watching." The words cut through her grief like a cold blade. Before she could respond, the ceremony began. The vows blurred together, blending with the soft murmur of guests and the muted ringing in Megan's ears. She felt disconnected from all of it, as if she were standing behind a window watching someone else's wedding. Her father's absence pressed on her chest with unbearable weight. She blinked away tears, swallowing hard so she wouldn't break in front of everyone. When the officiant finally announced them husband and wife, and they stepped aside to sign the marriage license, Megan's hand trembled so violently that the pen nearly slipped from her fingers. Kyle noticed, but instead of offering support, he exhaled, sharply annoyed. And then, the moment the ink dried, his expression shifted. The polite smile vanished. His eyes hardened. "You really are a gray nobody," he murmured without looking at her. "Lucky to have me." The words struck her like a physical blow. Shock washed through her, so quickly her vision dimmed. She staggered, her breath catching in her throat, and before anyone could react, her knees buckled. The room spun. Voices collided in panic, and Megan collapsed onto the polished floor. Guests rushed toward her, chairs scraping, someone calling for water. And just like that, Kyle transformed. His face softened into a mask of worry, his arms reaching toward her as though he had been gentle all along. "Megan, sweetheart, it's okay," he said loudly, voice sugary and theatrical. "Come on, love, breathe. I've got you." The performance was flawless, so flawless that anyone watching might have believed he truly cared. But as Megan began to register the noise around her, a whisper slipped from her lips, barely audible beneath the chaos. This was a mistake, all of it, even the baby if there is one. And in that moment, lying on the floor of her own wedding, she knew she was speaking a truth she could no longer ignore. As soon as Megan was steady enough to stand, Kyle tightened his grip around her arm and steered her away from the murmuring guests. His expression, so gentle and polished moments before, collapsed into something sharp and venomous the second the door to a small side room clicked shut behind them. The noise of the reception faded, replaced by a cold, brittle silence. Kyle didn't waste a second. "What the hell was that?" he snapped, his voice low but laced with rage. "Do you enjoy humiliating me?" Megan stared at him, still dazed, her pulse pounding in her ears. The man in front of her didn't resemble the one who had whispered sweet promises during their courtship. He looked different now, stripped of politeness, stripped of restraint, revealing something mean and calculated beneath the surface. "I wasn't trying to," she began. "Save it," he cut her off. "I should have known better. I should have known you would ruin everything." He stepped closer, anger radiating from him. "Do you think I married you for love? For your boring personality? No. I married you because your father was supposed to leave you property. Real property. A solid investment. Something worth my time." His words hit her with a new kind of shock, one that numbed her grief and replaced it with something colder. Kyle scoffed. "But your dear father decided to get sentimental before dying and transferred everything to Aaron Dawson. Your precious half-brother, the one no one ever sees, the one you barely even know." He shook his head with a bitter laugh. "Do you have any idea how stupid that made me look? How much time I wasted expecting something that never came?" Megan felt her breath shorten. She had known about the transfer, but never imagined it could provoke this much fury. "So here's how this is going to go," Kyle continued, his voice hardening. "You're going to file for divorce. Immediately. Today. I'm not dragging this out any longer." She swallowed, her voice barely holding. "Kyle, I might be pregnant." For a moment, everything froze. His eyes widened, not with fear or concern, but with something wilder, darker. Then he erupted. "Absolutely not," he roared, stepping so close she felt the heat of his anger. "You will not tie me to you with a kid. Do you hear me? I am not spending the next 18 years paying for your mistake. If you don't file the papers first, I swear I will make your life hell." He jabbed a finger toward her. "Your father dying? Your pathetic emotional breakdown? My father yelling at me? All of it, every single bit of it, is your fault. You can't do anything right. Not even the one thing I expected from you." Megan felt something inside her crack, the weight of his accusations sinking deep. She had believed she was making choices for her father's peace, for future that felt safe. But standing there, with Kyle's fury filling the small room like smoke, she understood the truth. She had never been safe with him at all. Megan didn't remember leaving the reception hall. Only the cold burst of air when she pushed through the doors and the frantic rhythm of her heartbeat as she stumbled into the parking lot. Her wedding dress felt heavier with every step, its layers dragging behind her like a burden she couldn't shake off. She didn't look back. She couldn't. All she knew was that she needed distance, space to breathe without Kyle's voice echoing in her ears. Her hands shook as she pulled out her phone and ordered a taxi. When the car arrived and she slid into the back seat, the skirt of her dress spilled across the floor like a white ocean. The driver, an older man with tired eyes, glanced at her through the rearview mirror, clearly puzzled, but polite enough not to ask questions. "Rough day," he murmured gently. Megan forced a nod, unable to find any real words. As the taxi pulled away from the venue, she tried to gather the massive skirt to her side, but the crinoline underneath was too wide, too stiff. It trapped her like a cage. Without thinking, she reached into her small clutch, pulled out a pair of manicure scissors, and began cutting through the fabric. The crisp snipping sounds filled the car, startling the driver at first. But he said nothing, just watched her silently, as if witnessing some private unraveling he had no right to interrupt. When the last layer of the crinoline finally gave way, Megan felt a strange rush of relief. It wasn't real freedom, but it was something one small chain removed. The driver cleared his throat softly. Couples fight. Weddings are stressful. Sometimes things look bad before they get better. Megan held on to that sentence longer than she should have. A tiny, foolish part of her clung to the idea that maybe Kyle would calm down. Maybe the pressure had broken him temporarily. Maybe there was still a chance things could be repaired. Hope, even false hope, was easier than facing the truth. But when the taxi turned toward East Portland and the familiar outline of her late father's apartment came into view, run-down building with peeling paint and sagging railings, her fragile hope began to dissolve. Inside the dim, cramped living space, everything smelled faintly of dust and old wood. The silence was suffocating. Megan barely made it to the couch before the weight of the evening crashed over her. Days passed in a blur. She stopped eating, stopped speaking. She moved through the apartment like a ghost, her steps slow and unfocused. Shame dug into her chest. Exhaustion wrapped around her like a heavy coat. And the future, once something she believed she could build, felt like a dark hallway with no door out. It wasn't living. It was surviving the emptiness left behind. The knock came late in the morning, sharp and impatient, startling Megan out of the numb haze that had swallowed her days. She hesitated before opening the door, her body heavy, her eyes swollen from nights without real sleep. On the other side stood a stern older man in a stiff gray suit, the kind who looked like he had long ago forgotten how to soften his expression. "Megan Dawson?" he asked, though his tone made it clear he already knew the answer. When she nodded, he thrust a stack of documents into her hands. "Divorce summons. Sign where indicated. My client wants this handled quickly." "Kyle." "Of course." The man didn't hide his disdain. His eyes drifted over her wrinkled T-shirt, her tangled hair. The exhaustion etched into her face. "You know," he added dryly, "Mr. Dawson told me about your situation. Considering the timeline, he's not convinced any potential pregnancy is even his." His lip curled faintly. "Women these days." Megan felt the words scrape against every raw part of her, but she was too hollow, too drained to defend herself. Even breathing required effort. She managed a quiet, I understand, though she didn't understand any of it. How quickly her world had collapsed. How she had become someone people spoke to like she was less than human. The man shrugged as if her response didn't matter. "Sign today." And don't make this difficult. He's already being generous by wanting a clean break. He turned and walked off without another word. When the door shut behind him, Megan stood motionless, the papers trembling in her hands. She thought about calling a taxi to go to the courthouse to get it over with, but she no longer had that luxury. She had quit her job just before the wedding, believing she would start a new chapter in life. Her savings were nearly gone. Her father's old apartment, once a comfort, felt like a cage she couldn't afford to leave. So she gathered what little strength she had and stepped outside. The journey was miserable. 2 buses, then a long transfer, then another crowded city line that reeked of stale air and damp coats. Megan clung to the metal poles, her head spinning with each lurch of the vehicle. When she finally stepped off near the courthouse, her legs felt like they were made of water. She walked the last several blocks slowly, each step small and deliberate. The cold January wind bit through her thin jacket, stinging her skin. Halfway there, her breath tightened. She sank onto a bench, gripping its edge, her vision blurring. Hopelessness rose like a tide. She felt trapped in a life she no longer recognized, too ashamed to ask for help, too exhausted to fight, and too alone to imagine anything ever getting better. For the first time, she wondered if she would make it through at all. Megan sat hunched on the courthouse bench, trying to steady her breathing, when a gentle pressure brushed against her hand. She startled, looking up to see a homeless woman standing beside her, a thin figure wrapped in several mismatched layers of clothing, a knit hat pulled low over graying hair. Her eyes, however, were clear and oddly focused, as if she saw far more than everything around them. "Don't go in yet," the woman said softly. Megan blinked, unsure she'd heard correctly. The woman's hand tightened just slightly around Megan's. "When you get home, open your vanity. Behind the back panel." The words were precise, almost rehearsed. Megan's first instinct was confusion, then unease. She glanced around, half expecting someone else to be listening, but the crowds moved past them without a second look. When she looked back, the homeless woman's gaze was fixed on her with unsettling familiarity. "How do you?" Megan began. "Megan," the woman said, cutting her off gently. "Just remember what I told you." Her name, hearing her name from a stranger, sent a cold ripple down Megan's spine. She looked down at her bag, suddenly worried, thinking maybe the woman had rifled through her documents while she sat there dazed. "I don't have cash," Megan whispered, embarrassed by how hoarse her voice sounded. "And I'm not really in a place to," the woman shook her head. "I'm not here to ask you for anything." Her voice softened even further. "We'll meet again, but by then things will be better for you." Before Megan could respond, the woman stepped back, merging so quickly into the stream of pedestrians that within seconds she was gone, vanished into the noise and motion of the street as if she'd never been there at all. Megan's heart pounded as she opened her bag with trembling hands. Her wallet was still there. The papers were untouched. Nothing was missing. But something was different, an inexplicable unease, and beneath it, a small flicker she hadn't felt in weeks. Curiosity, a strange, almost impossible curiosity that cut through her despair with the faintest glow. Behind the back panel of her vanity, how would a stranger know anything about that? And why did her voice feel so familiar? For the first time since the wedding, Megan felt her mind pull toward something other than dread, something waiting for her at home. When Megan finally gathered enough strength to enter the courthouse, Kyle was already there, standing with his arms crossed, impatience radiating off him like heat. He didn't acknowledge her at first. He just glanced at her briefly, scoffed, and then looked away as if her presence irritated him. The hearing itself was painfully short. There was nothing to divide, nothing to negotiate. All of Richard Dawson's property had legally gone to Aaron, and Kyle had already been informed there would be no inheritance, no assets, no payoff. The judge moved briskly, through the paperwork, barely looking up as signatures were collected and copies stamped. It felt surreal to Megan. Months of emotional devastation reduced to a few pages and a handful of legal phrases. Kyle, however, wasn't leaving without one final jab. "Give me the ring," he demanded the moment they stepped outside the courtroom. His voice was sharp, as if the words themselves were a small act of violence. Megan didn't hesitate. She reached into her pocket, retrieved the simple band, and placed it in his hand without a word. The swiftness of her response seemed to catch him off guard. "That's it," he muttered, incredulous. "No scene? No begging? No guilt trip?" She shook her head. "No, you can have it." For a moment, a brief, flickering moment, Kyle looked almost unsettled, as if her calmness disrupted the script he had prepared. He had expected tears, maybe another collapse. He had expected her to cling, to plead, to make everything harder. But Megan simply stood there, tired but steady, and there was nothing for him to feed on. Kyle's jaw clenched. "Unbelievable!" he hissed before turning away. He stormed down the courthouse steps, his anger echoing in the quick, agitated stride of his feet hitting concrete. The door swung behind him, rattling slightly, and just like that he was gone. Megan remained still for a moment, her breath visible in the cold air. Something unfamiliar spread through her chest, subtle, tentative, but unmistakably real. Lightness. Not joy, not relief, not hope. Just a quiet loosening of the weight that had been crushing her since before the wedding. A moment where her lungs felt less tight, her thoughts a shade clearer. It wasn't freedom, not fully, but it was the first step toward it. Megan returned to the apartment with a heaviness that felt almost routine by now. But beneath it, a small, persistent thread of curiosity tugged at her. The homeless woman's strange warning echoed through her mind as she stepped inside, shutting the door behind her. The air was still, carrying the faint scent of old varnish and dust. Without removing her coat, she walked directly to the bedroom where her father's old vanity stood, a heavy, oak-framed piece that had belonged to her mother before she passed. Megan had dusted it dozens of times but had never once imagined it might be hiding anything. Her hands trembled as she pulled open the drawers. Nothing unusual. Makeup from years ago, old hairpins, yellowed tissues. But the woman hadn't meant the drawers. Megan crouched down, examining the back panel. Only then did she notice the tiny screws anchoring it in place. She went to the kitchen drawer, found a dull screwdriver, and returned to kneel in front of the vanity. Each screw turned with surprising ease, as if they had been loosened once before. When the last screw fell onto the carpet, she slid the panel away and froze. Inside the hollow space were two objects, a small brass key, and a folded piece of paper. Her heart thudded as she reached for the note. The handwriting was instantly recognizable. Strong, slanted letters she had seen on every birthday card, every refrigerator reminder, every message her father had ever left for her. "Megan, use this key to open the blue suitcase your mother left behind. Take your time. Don't rush. Aaron will explain the rest." Dad, for a moment, she couldn't breathe. Her father had written this, knowing he wouldn't be here to explain anything. He had hidden it deliberately, waiting for her to find it only when she needed it most. Hands shaking, Megan went to the hallway closet. Wedged behind a stack of blankets was the old navy blue suitcase, scuffed and worn from years of disuse. She dragged it out, set it on the floor, and inserted the brass key into the lock. It clicked open smoothly. When she raised the lid, her breath caught. Neatly stacked inside were bundles of cash, far more than she had expected, far more than she had seen in her life. Not millions, but easily tens of thousands of dollars. Enough to stabilize her life in a city like Portland for a long time. Beneath the money lay a smart phone she didn't recognize at first, until she remembered the name on her father's note. Aaron, her half-brother's phone, left for her, prepared long before he died. Megan pressed a hand to her mouth, tears rising as the weight of the moment sank in. Her father hadn't abandoned her. He had been protecting her all along. Megan stared at the phone in the suitcase for a long moment, her pulse quick and uneven. The number taped to its back was written in the same confident handwriting as the note. With trembling fingers, she typed it in. The call didn't ring once. Aaron Dawson, a calm voice answered, almost as if he had been holding the phone in his hand, waiting for her. Megan swallowed, unsure where to begin. "Hi, it's Megan. I found the suitcase. And the note." A breath of relief slipped through the line. "Good. I was hoping you'd call today." There was something eerily familiar in the tone. A certainty, a steady warmth she couldn't quite place. "I need to tell you something," Aaron continued. "And I need you to let me finish before you ask questions." "Okay," she whispered. "I met you earlier today," he said. "Outside the courthouse." Megan frowned. "That's impossible. I was alone except for—" her words stopped. "The homeless woman." Aaron's voice softened. "It was me. The disguise was part costume, part theater training. I figured it was the only safe way to reach you without drawing attention." A dizzy wave hit her. She couldn't reconcile the thin, trembling woman she'd seen on the bench with the steady voice now speaking through the phone. "But why?" she managed. "Because you were in danger," Aaron said plainly. "And because Dad wanted me to protect you if anything ever happened." Megan closed her eyes, bracing herself. Aaron continued, voice steady but edged with long-buried bitterness. "Kyle's father, Henry Dawson, held a grudge against Richard for years. Old business disputes, failed deals, accusations. They turned into hatred. Henry wanted revenge. He pushed Kyle into pursuing you, told him to marry you, get access to Dad's property, and use that to settle the score." Megan felt her stomach drop. "Richard found out," Aaron went on quietly, "and he panicked. His health was already failing, and he didn't want to overwhelm you. So he did the only thing he could. He transferred everything to me. Not because he loved me more, but because he was trying to shield you. Legally, emotionally, financially. He hoped it would remove the target from your back." Her eyes blurred with tears. Her father hadn't doubted her. He'd been fighting for her. "And Kyle," she whispered. "They ran," Aaron said. "Kyle and Henry. Federal investigators opened a case on fraudulent loans and shell companies tied to Henry's businesses. They left the country 2 days ago. They won't be coming back anytime soon." Megan pressed a hand to her chest, the shock almost too large to process. "And the pregnancy?" she asked, voice barely audible. Aaron exhaled. "You're not pregnant. False alarm. The stress, the timing it happens." Relief flooded her body. Relief tangled with grief, confusion, and the remnants of fear. "Listen, Megan," Aaron said gently. "You need to keep everything quiet for a few months. The money, the suitcase, even our conversations. It's safer for both of us that way." Megan nodded, even though he couldn't see her. For the first time in months, she felt the ground beneath her feet begin to steady. The months that followed passed not in dramatic leaps, but in small, careful steps, tiny shifts that slowly pieced Megan back together. She kept her father's hidden inheritance exactly as Aaron advised, untouched, unmentioned, and locked away where no one could stumble upon it. It became less of a fortune and more of a lifeline, something quiet and steady beneath the surface of her life. Emotionally, she began to stabilize. The numbness softened. The constant dread loosened its grip. On some mornings, she even woke without feeling a weight on her chest. One of her first tasks was visiting a clinic. She went alone, sitting in the waiting room with her hands folded tightly in her lap. When the doctor confirmed she was not pregnant and likely never had been, she felt a wave of relief wash through her, mingled with something gentler, almost mournful. The ordeal had been draining, terrifying, and humiliating, but at least it was over. At least there was no child tying her to Kyle's cruelty for the rest of her life. In the quiet weeks that followed, Erin became a consistent presence. They met in coffee shops, walked along the Willamette River, and sometimes simply sat together in her apartment while she talked through everything she'd been afraid to say out loud. He never pushed, never judged. He listened. For Megan, who had felt alone for so long, it was the first time in years she had someone she could rely on. Little by little, the heaviness inside her eased. Erin told her more about their father, how Richard had called him late at night to discuss legal options, how he'd worried constantly about Megan's vulnerability, how he'd fought to ensure she would be protected even when his own health was failing. "Your dad never stopped loving you," Erin said one evening as they walked through Laurelhurst Park. "Every choice he made was for you. Even transferring everything to me, it wasn't about taking anything away from you. It was about making sure Kyle couldn't get near it or near you." Megan stopped walking, letting the words settle in her chest. For the first time, she didn't feel confused or hurt by her father's decisions. She felt grateful, deeply, achingly grateful. Life began to feel possible again. She started planning her next steps, slowly, cautiously. She researched safer neighborhoods in Portland, apartments where she could start fresh without the shadows of Kyle or the memories of the past few months. She didn't rush. She allowed herself to heal in the quiet moments between decisions. One afternoon, as she sat by her bedroom window watching the soft rain fall over the city, a calm warmth settled over her. No fear, no weight, just stillness. Her lips curved into a small, genuine smile. For the first time since her father died, Megan felt something real and undeniable rising within her. Freedom.